I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd fed 5 hungry children for 30 years, when Miguel walked in without knocking. Again. The afternoon light filtered through my lace curtains, the ones I'd sewn myself when money was tight and everything in our house had to be made, not bought. "Mom, I need you to sign these papers," he said, dropping a thick manila folder next to my cup of café con leche. The sound made me jump, and a few drops spilled onto the plastic tablecloth I'd covered with clear contact paper to protect it. I looked up at my youngest son, my baby who was now 43 with graying temples and tired eyes. When did he start looking at me like I was a burden? When did his visits become about paperwork instead of asking how I was feeling? "What are they for, Mijo?" I asked, reaching for the folder. My hands moved slowly, arthritis had settled into my knuckles like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. "Just some stuff about the house. Legal stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." He pulled out a pen, one of those expensive ones from his office, and set it down with purpose. "Mom, just sign these. You don't read anyway." The words hit me like a slap. "You don't read anyway." I sat there, staring at my son's impatient face, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, though that hurt too, but something deeper. My sense of who I was, maybe. Or who I thought I was to him. "You don't read anyway." Did he forget that I read to him every night when he was small? That I read those thick medical books when his sister Maria was born with that heart condition, determined to understand every word the doctor said? Did he forget that I read every homework assignment, every permission slip, every report card? That I taught myself to read legal documents when his father got hurt at the factory and we needed to fight for disability benefits? I looked around my kitchen, at the recipe cards I'd copied by hand from my mother, at the calendar where I wrote down every doctor's appointment, every birthday, every important date in neat cursive. At the stack of books from the library that I picked up every Tuesday, stories that took me to places I'd never traveled to but could visit in my mind. "You don't read anyway." "Miguel," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I've been reading since before you were born." He sighed, the kind of heavy sigh that said he was tired of dealing with difficult old women. "Mom, I know. I just meant, look, these are complicated legal things. Trust me, okay? I went to college. I understand this stuff." Yes, he went to college. On scholarships I helped him apply for, with money I saved by working double shifts at the diner and taking in other people's sewing. I read every application, every financial aid form, every acceptance letter. But apparently, I don't read. Something shifted inside me then, like furniture being rearranged in a room I thought I knew by heart. I looked at the thick folder, at the pen waiting for my signature, at my son who was checking his phone instead of looking at me. What exactly am I signing, Miguel? Just some updates to the deed. Making things easier for later. You know, for when. He gestured vaguely, unable to say the words "when you die" but meaning them just the same. I pulled the folder closer to me, ignoring his frustrated huff. The papers inside were thick, official-looking, full of whereas and heretofore and other legal words that Miguel assumed I couldn't understand. But I'd read documents like this before, when I'd bought this house 30 years ago with money I'd saved dollar by dollar. "I think I'll look these over first," I said, closing the folder and sliding it toward myself. "Mom, come on. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just sign them, and I'll get out of your hair." Get out of my hair. As if spending time with his mother was such a burden. As if the woman who gave birth to him, raised him, sacrificed for him, was now just an obstacle to overcome. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, and tucked the folder under my arm. "I'll read them tonight." "Mom." "Miguel," I said, using the voice I'd perfected during his teenage years, the one that meant the discussion was over. I said I'll read them tonight. He left frustrated, muttering something about stubborn old women. But I heard him. Just like I heard everything else he thought I couldn't understand. After his car pulled away, I sat back down at my kitchen table and opened the folder. The words swam before my eyes, not because I couldn't read them, but because I was crying. You don't read anyway. Well, Miguel, tonight you're going to learn just how wrong you are. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Miguel's voice, you don't read anyway. The words echoed in my head like a song you can't shake, except this song hurt. I made myself a cup of manzanilla tea and sat in my rocking chair, the one I'd nursed all 5 of my children in. The house was quiet except for the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood settling. In the lamplight, I started thinking about when this all began, this assumption that I was somehow less than I used to be. It started small, so small I almost missed it. 3 months ago, Miguel began showing up at my doctor appointments. I was in the neighborhood, he'd say, but my doctor's office was nowhere near his work. At first, I was touched. My busy son, making time for his mother's health. But then Dr. Herrera started talking to Miguel instead of me, as if I wasn't sitting right there. How has she been sleeping? He'd ask Miguel. I sleep fine, I'd interrupt, but they'd continue their conversation over my head like I was a child. Miguel started answering questions I could answer myself. Questions about my medications, my pain levels, my memory. When I tried to speak, Miguel would pat my hand and say, Mom gets confused sometimes, document. Confused? I wasn't confused. I was ignored. Then there was the bank incident last month. I'd gone to make my regular deposit, my social security check and the little bit I earned hemming pants for Mrs. Rodriguez's alterations shop. The young teller, someone I'd never seen before, kept looking over my shoulder. Is someone helping you today, ma'am? She asked, like I was lost. I'm depositing my check, like I have every month for 10 years, I said. But she seemed nervous, kept glancing around like she expected someone younger to appear and handle things properly. When Miguel showed up, because apparently he'd asked them to call him whenever I came in, she visibly relaxed. Oh good, you're here, she said to him. I was just helping your mother with her banking. Helping me? I'd been banking longer than this girl had been alive. Miguel took over then, talking about setting up online access so he could keep an eye on things. Making everything easier for me. The teller nodded along, like this was perfectly normal, like I wasn't standing right there with my own opinions about my own money. I remember the grocery store incident too. I was buying ingredients for Maria's birthday cake, the tres leches cake I'd been making for 30 years. I had my list, carefully written out, with the prices I'd memorized from years of shopping. But I was moving slowly, checking each item against my list, making sure I stayed within my budget. The young cashier grew impatient. She started scanning items before I'd finished unloading my cart, huffing when I asked her to slow down so I could keep track of the total. Do you need me to call someone? She asked. Sometimes older customers need help. Help? I'd been managing household budgets since before she was born. I'd fed a family of 7 on $30 a week during the worst times. I could stretch $1 until it screamed. But somehow, because I was careful, because I took my time, I needed help. Even my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who used to ask for my advice about everything from gardening to grandchildren, now spoke to me differently. Louder, slower, as if age had somehow affected my hearing or intelligence. How are you doing, Rosa? She'd ask, drawing out the words like I might not understand. I'm fine, Carmen, I'd answer, but she'd nod knowingly, like I'd said something else entirely. When did being older become the same as being incapable? When did gray hair and wrinkles become signs of incompetence instead of experience? I thought about my record keeping, the careful notes I made about everything. My address book, written in my neat cursive, with every family birthday, anniversary, and phone number. My recipe collection, accumulated over decades and annotated with notes about what worked and what didn't. My household budget, balanced to the penny every month without fail. I thought about the English I'd taught myself, working through grammar books at night after 12-hour shifts, determined that my children would never be embarrassed by their mother's accent or mistakes. The way I'd navigated every bureaucracy, schools, hospitals, government offices, advocating for my family when no one else would. But somehow, all of that had become invisible. All those years of competence, erased by the assumption that age equals inability. Miguel's words weren't just cruel, they were part of something bigger. A pattern I'd been too polite, too hopeful, to see clearly. You don't read anyway. As if reading was something I used to do, back when I was worth listening to. I looked at that manila folder sitting on my kitchen counter, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than hurt. I felt angry. And anger, I was beginning to remember, could be useful. The next morning, I woke up with purpose for the first time in months. I'd spent half the night reading those papers Miguel wanted me to sign, without reading, and what I found made my blood run cold. But I wasn't going to let fear paralyze me. Not this time. I dressed carefully in my navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to graduations and church services, and pinned my hair back the way I used to for important occasions. If I was going to ask for help, I was going to do it with dignity. The legal clinic was in a strip mall between a laundromat and a tax preparation office. Not exactly impressive, but the woman at the senior center had told me they helped people like me. People like me, I was still figuring out what that meant. The waiting room smelled like coffee and had mismatched chairs that had seen better days. I clutched my purse tighter, Miguel's papers inside feeling like they weighed 100 pounds. A part of me wanted to turn around and go home, pretend none of this was happening. Mrs. Cruz. A young woman appeared in the doorway, not much older than my granddaughter Anna. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wore a simple black suit that looked professional but not intimidating. "I'm Sarah Martinez. Thank you for coming in." She shook my hand firmly, looking me directly in the eyes. When was the last time someone had done that? Really looked at me like I was a person worth seeing. Her office was small but organized, with law books lining the shelves and a photo of what looked like her own grandmother on her desk. She gestured to a chair across from her desk and waited for me to sit before taking her own seat. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Cruz?" I opened my mouth to speak and found my voice catching. Where do you begin when your own child has betrayed you? How do you say out loud that the baby you held, the boy you sacrificed for, the man you're proudest of, has been lying to you? "My son," I began, then stopped. Tried again. "My son brought me some papers to sign. He said I don't need to worry about them, that I wouldn't understand them anyway." Sarah nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. She didn't rush me or finish my sentences. She just waited. "But I did read them," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "And I think he's trying to take my house. May I see the papers?" I pulled out the manila folder with trembling hands. Sarah took it gently, as if she understood how much courage it had taken for me to bring it here. She opened it carefully, and I watched her face as she read. At first, her expression remained professional, neutral. But as she turned the pages, I saw her eyebrows draw together slightly. Then her lips pressed into a thin line. By the time she reached the third page, she was frowning openly. "Mrs. Cruz," she said finally, looking up at me. "How much do you know about what these documents would do?" "I know they would put my house in Miguel's name. And something about my bank accounts too." My voice was barely above a whisper. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that hurt. Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle but serious. "Mrs. Cruz, if you had signed these documents, you would have transferred full ownership of your property to your son. Not just after you pass away, immediately. You would also be giving him complete access to all your financial accounts." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known it was bad, but hearing it from a lawyer made it worse somehow. More real. More final. You would essentially be signing away everything you own, she continued. Your home, your savings, your financial independence. All of it. I sat there in stunned silence. This wasn't about making things easier or planning ahead. This was theft. My own son had planned to rob me of everything I'd worked for my entire life. Mrs. Cruz, are you okay? Can I get you some water? I realized I was crying. Not the angry tears from the night before, but deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere I'd kept locked away. I'm sorry, I said, reaching for the tissues Sarah offered. He's my son. I raised him. I worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I gave him everything. I know, Sarah said softly. And I'm sorry this is happening to you. But Mrs. Cruz, I want you to know something important. You did the right thing by coming here. You saved yourself. Did I? I asked. Because right now it feels like I've lost my son either way. Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Cruz, can you tell me if there have been other instances where your son has made financial decisions for you without your full understanding or consent? The question opened a floodgate I didn't know existed. And suddenly, I was telling this stranger things I'd barely admitted to myself. Sarah asked me to bring in my bank statements, checkbooks, and any other financial documents I had at home. We need to see the full picture, she'd said. I didn't sleep that night, wondering what other betrayals were hiding in plain sight. The next morning, I spread everything across my kitchen table, the same table where Miguel had dismissed me just 3 days ago. Bank statements going back 6 months, my checkbook with its careful notations, receipts I'd saved in an old shoebox. My whole financial life laid bare under the morning light. What I found made me sick. There were withdrawals I didn't remember making. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there. Then bigger ones. $300 in February. $500 in March. Each one marked ATM withdrawal, but I hadn't used an ATM in years. I was too afraid of those machines, preferring to speak to a real person at the bank. My hands shook as I traced my finger down the statement. How had I missed this? But I knew how. Miguel had started insisting on helping with my banking, picking up my statements from the mailbox, offering to balance my checkbook for me. One less thing for you to worry about, Mom. I called Sarah's office with trembling fingers. Mrs. Cruz. What's wrong? I found something. Something bad. She agreed to see me that afternoon. I packed everything into a grocery bag and took the bus to her office, my stomach churning with each bump in the road. The nausea wasn't just from the bus ride, it was from the growing realization that my son had been stealing from me for months. Sarah's face grew darker as she reviewed each statement. She made notes in a yellow legal pad, her pen moving quickly across the page. The scratch of pen on paper was the only sound in the small office. Mrs. Cruz, have you given your son access to your bank account? Your PIN number? Your debit card? No, I said firmly. I've never given anyone those things. Yet someone has been making regular withdrawals. Always small amounts, always at different ATM locations. She showed me the pattern on the statements. This is classic financial abuse. Small amounts that might go unnoticed, spread out over time. The word abuse hit me like a slap. I'd heard about elder abuse on the news, but it always happened to other people. People who weren't careful. People who didn't have loving families. There's more, Sarah said gently. I ran a credit check with your permission. Mrs. Cruz, there are 3 credit card accounts opened in your name that you didn't authorize. The room started spinning. 3 credit cards. All opened within the last 4 months. Two have balances totaling nearly $8,000. $8,000. It might as well have been $8 million. I lived on $1,200 a month from Social Security and the little bit I earned sewing. $8,000 was more than I spent in half a year. I don't understand. How could he open credit cards in my name? Sarah's expression was grim. If someone has access to your personal information, Social Security number, date of birth, address, it's not difficult. Especially if they share your last name and can claim to be helping an elderly relative. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the evidence of my son's betrayal. The bank statements, the credit reports, the papers he'd wanted me to sign. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't catch my breath. The walls of my small house seemed to be closing in. I hadn't eaten anything all day, but the thought of food made me nauseated. My heart was racing, and I felt dizzy when I stood up. Was this what a heart attack felt like? Or was this what it felt like when your world collapsed? I called my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, something I hadn't done in months. Rosa? Are you all right? You sound strange. Carmen, I think I need help. She was at my door in 5 minutes, took one look at me, and insisted on driving me to the emergency room. The doctor said it was an anxiety attack, brought on by severe stress. They gave me something to calm my nerves and made me promise to follow up with my regular doctor. These episodes can be dangerous for someone your age, the young doctor said. You need to try to reduce the stress in your life. Reduce the stress. As if I could just decide to have a different son. Mrs. Patterson drove me home and insisted on staying the night. She made me tea and sat with me in the living room, not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Carmen, I finally said, around midnight when we were both staring at the muted television. What would you do if someone you loved was hurting you? Really hurting you? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'd remember that love isn't supposed to hurt, Rosa. And I'd protect myself, even if it was hard. Protect myself. For 72 years, I'd protected everyone else. My children, my grandchildren, even my husband when he was drinking too much and spending money we didn't have. I'd always been the protector. I'd never learned how to protect myself from the people I loved most. I knew I had to confront Miguel, but I dreaded it more than anything I'd ever had to do. Sarah had advised me to have someone present as a witness, so I asked Mrs. Patterson to stay when I called him to come over. We need to talk about the papers you brought me, I said over the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you finally sign them? His tone was casual, like we were discussing the weather. Just come over, Miguel. Please. He arrived an hour later, walking into my kitchen like he owned it. Which, I realized with a chill, he'd been planning to do exactly that. Where are the papers, Mom? I need to get them filed. I stayed seated at my kitchen table, the bank statements spread in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. Mrs. Patterson sat beside me, her presence giving me strength I didn't know I had. Miguel, we need to talk about my bank account. His expression changed instantly. The casual confidence melted away, replaced by something harder. What about it? About the money that's been disappearing. About the credit cards opened in my name. My voice was stronger than I expected. About how you've been stealing from me. The word stealing hung in the air like smoke. Miguel's face flushed red. Stealing? Mom, what are you talking about? I've been helping you manage your finances because you can't handle them anymore. I never asked for your help. I never gave you permission to take my money. He laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Permission? Mom, do you see yourself? Do you see how you've been struggling? Forgetting things, getting confused at the bank, needing help with simple tasks. Each word was designed to hurt, to make me doubt myself. I felt Mrs. Patterson's hand squeeze mine under the table. I'm not confused, Miguel. I know exactly what you've done. You know what? He leaned forward, his voice getting louder. This is exactly why I need to handle your affairs. You're being paranoid. You're accusing your own son of being a thief because some stranger filled your head with crazy ideas. That stranger is a lawyer. And she showed me the evidence. Miguel's expression turned cold in a way I'd never seen before. This wasn't my boy anymore. This was someone I didn't recognize. A lawyer? Mom, what have you done? I protected myself. Protected yourself. From what? From your family trying to help you. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against my linoleum floor. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you know what this means? I stayed silent, but inside, my heart was breaking. This was really happening. My son was really angry at me for stopping him from robbing me. Fine, he said, his voice deadly quiet. You want to play games with lawyers. You want to treat your own son like a criminal. Then don't expect me to keep pretending everything is normal. Miguel, please. No, Mom. You made your choice. You chose strangers over family. You chose suspicion over trust. He moved toward the door, then turned back with a cruel smile. And since you're so worried about being taken advantage of, maybe you shouldn't expect to see Emma and Diego anymore either. My grandchildren. He was threatening to keep my grandchildren away from me. Miguel, don't. They're not part of this. They're my children, Mom. And I won't have them around someone who thinks their father is a thief. It's not healthy for them to see their grandmother acting so unstable. The word unstable hit me like a physical blow. He was turning this around, making me the problem, making me the one who was wrong. After he left, I sat in my kitchen crying while Mrs. Patterson made me tea. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup. Rosa, he's manipulating you, she said gently. That's what abusers do. They make you feel like you're the problem. But it was hard to remember that when my phone started ringing. First, it was my daughter Maria. Mom, Miguel called me. He's very upset. He says you're accusing him of terrible things. Then my son Roberto, Mom, what's this about lawyers and Miguel stealing? This doesn't sound like you. My daughter-in-law Carmen, I think you might be misunderstanding Miguel's intentions, Mom. He's just trying to help. One by one, they called. Some were gentle, some were frustrated, but the message was the same: I was causing problems. I was being unreasonable. I should just work things out with Miguel privately, as a family. Families don't involve lawyers, Maria said. Can't you just talk to him? He's your son, Mom, Roberto added. He loves you. He would never hurt you. But he had hurt me. He was hurting me right now. By evening, I felt more alone than I had since my husband died. My family, the people I'd spent my whole life loving and protecting, were choosing sides. And most of them weren't choosing mine. I stared at the phone, wondering if I should call Sarah, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. What if they were right? What if I was just a paranoid old woman who couldn't trust the people who loved her most? The phone calls kept coming. Every day, someone from my family had something to say about my situation with Miguel. Each conversation left me feeling smaller, more confused, more alone. Mom, you're tearing the family apart, Maria said during one particularly painful call. Is this really worth destroying everything we have? Is this worth it? The question haunted me as I lay awake night after night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with my husband for 30 years. Was protecting my house, my small savings account, my dignity worth losing my children? My grandchildren? I started having what Dr. Herrera called episodes. That's the clinical word for when you can't breathe, when your chest feels like someone is standing on it, when your heart beats so fast you think it might explode. I'd be washing dishes or folding laundry, and suddenly the world would spin and I'd have to grab onto something to keep from falling. These are panic attacks, Mrs. Cruz, the doctor explained. Very common in people experiencing high levels of stress. High levels of stress. As if my son stealing from me and my family abandoning me was just stress. I stopped eating regular meals. Food tasted like cardboard, and my stomach was always twisted in knots anyway. Mrs. Patterson started bringing me soup, but I could only manage a few spoonfuls before the nausea hit. "You're wasting away," she said, her voice full of worry. "Rosa, you've lost at least 10 pounds. 10 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. I was already small, and now my clothes hung on me like I was playing dress-up in someone else's wardrobe." The worst part was the doubt. It crept in during the quiet hours, whispering terrible things. Maybe Miguel was right. Maybe I was getting old and paranoid. Maybe loving families do handle things differently than I thought. Maybe I was the problem. I found myself checking and rechecking things obsessively. Did I lock the door? Did I turn off the stove? Did I really see those bank statements, or did I imagine them? The line between reality and fear blurred until I couldn't trust my own mind. Roberto came to visit on a Thursday afternoon. My eldest son, the one who used to read me poetry when he was in high school, sat in my living room looking uncomfortable. "Mom, we're worried about you." "Who's we?" "All of us. Maria, Carmen, even the kids. Miguel says you've been acting strange. Paranoid. Making wild accusations." I felt something break inside me. "Roberto, do you think I'm losing my mind?" He was quiet for too long. That silence told me everything. "I think maybe you're overwhelmed, Mom. Maybe you need help making decisions." Miguel found this nice assisted living place. Assisted living. The words hit me like ice water. "Just to look at, Mom. Just to see if maybe you'd be happier somewhere with people to help you. Take the pressure off." The pressure. The pressure of living independently in my own house that I'd worked 30 years to pay off. "Roberto, I'm not ready for assisted living. I can take care of myself." "Can you, though?" Miguel showed me the credit card bills, Mom. "He says you've been spending money you don't have, getting confused about finances." Miguel's version of the story. Miguel's lies, dressed up as concern. Did he show you how those credit cards were opened without my knowledge? Did he explain the money disappearing from my bank account? Roberto looked at me with pity. Pity. My own son was looking at me like I was a broken thing that needed to be managed. "Mom, sometimes when we get older, we forget things. Make mistakes. There's no shame in needing help." I wanted to scream. I wanted to show him the evidence, make him understand. But I could see it in his eyes, he'd already decided. They'd all decided. I was the problem that needed to be solved. After he left, I sat in my kitchen and cried until I had no tears left. Then I called Sarah. "Mrs. Cruz. You sound upset." "They want to put me in a home," I whispered. "They think I'm crazy." "Who thinks you're crazy?" "My family. My children. They think Miguel is just trying to help me, and I'm the one who's confused." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Cruz, this is very common in elder abuse cases. The abuser often turns the family against the victim by portraying themselves as the concerned caregiver and the victim as mentally unstable. But what if they're right? What if I am losing my mind? Mrs. Cruz, you brought me clear evidence of financial fraud. You recognized the deception when others missed it. You took action to protect yourself. Those aren't the actions of someone who's mentally unstable." But late that night, alone in my house that might not be mine much longer, I wondered if standing up for myself was worth this pain. If being right was worth being alone. Maybe Miguel was right about one thing, maybe I didn't understand how families were supposed to work anymore. Maybe love was supposed to hurt this much. Mrs. Cruz, I want you to meet some people, Sarah said during our meeting the following week. I'd lost more weight, and she'd noticed the tremor in my hands when I signed papers. There's a support group that meets every Wednesday at the community center. People who've been through similar situations. Similar situations. I wasn't sure I wanted to meet other people whose children had betrayed them. It felt too much like admitting I'd joined some terrible club I never wanted to be part of. But Sarah was persistent, and Mrs. Patterson offered to drive me. What's the worst that could happen? She asked. You sit quietly for an hour and then we leave. The community center smelled like coffee and industrial disinfectant. A circle of mismatched chairs sat in the middle of a room with motivational posters on the walls. 7 people were already seated when we arrived, most of them around my age, a few younger. Welcome, said a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I facilitate our group. Would you like to introduce yourself? I'm Rosa, I said quietly. I'm not sure I should be here. That's okay, Elena said. Most of us weren't sure either, when we first came. I listened as the others shared their stories. There was Carlos, whose daughter had emptied his retirement account to pay for her boyfriend's gambling debts. Margaret, whose son had moved into her house and refused to leave, selling her furniture piece by piece for drug money. James, whose nephew had used his identity to take out loans and credit cards. But their family, each story seemed to say. How do you fight back against family? When it was my turn to speak, I found myself telling strangers things I couldn't say to my own children. About Miguel's dismissive attitude, the money disappearing from my account, the papers he'd wanted me to sign without reading. He told me I don't read anyway, I said, and my voice cracked on those words that still hurt so much. Elena nodded knowingly. They diminish us first. Make us feel incompetent, forgettable, invisible. It makes the theft easier when we don't trust our own judgment. My daughter used to tell people I was getting senile whenever I questioned her decisions, Margaret added. Made me start believing it myself. The gaslighting is often worse than the financial abuse, said Carlos. The money can be replaced. But when they make you doubt your own mind. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crazy. I felt understood. After the formal meeting ended, Elena approached me. Rosa, how are you holding up? Really? I almost lied, almost said I was fine like I'd been telling everyone else. But something about her steady gaze made me tell the truth. I'm not sleeping. I can't eat. My own family thinks I'm paranoid, and sometimes I think they're right. Maybe I should just let Miguel have what he wants and try to keep the peace. Elena sat down beside me. Can I tell you something? 5 years ago, my son was doing exactly what your Miguel is doing. Taking money, making decisions for me, telling everyone I was confused and needed help. I almost signed everything over to him just to stop the fighting. What changed your mind? I realized that peace built on lies isn't really peace. It's just surrender. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of herself at what looked like a graduation ceremony. That's me getting my paralegal certificate last year. Turns out this old brain still works just fine when it's not being told it doesn't. Before I left that day, Elena gave me her phone number. Call me anytime, she said. Day or night. Sometimes you just need someone who understands to tell you that you're not crazy. Carlos walked out with me and Mrs. Patterson. Rosa, can I give you some advice? Document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every time someone makes you feel like you're imagining things. Write it down. Date it. Your memory isn't failing, but theirs might be conveniently selective. That night, I started a journal. Not just about the legal case, but about my feelings, my fears, my small victories. Writing it down made it real, made it mine in a way that couldn't be disputed or dismissed. Wednesday, March 15th, Miguel called today and said he was disappointed in me for involving lawyers. He said I was being difficult and that the family was concerned about my mental state. I told him I was thinking clearly for the first time in months. He hung up on me. Thursday, March 16th, Maria visited and tried to convince me to work things out with Miguel. She said lawyers would just make everything worse and cost money I couldn't afford. I reminded her that Miguel had already cost me thousands of dollars I couldn't afford. She didn't have an answer for that. Friday, March 17th, Elena called to check on me. We talked for an hour. She reminded me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. For the first time since this nightmare began, I went to bed feeling like I wasn't completely alone. There were people who understood, who'd survived, who'd rebuilt their lives after their own families had failed them. Maybe I could too. Sarah spread a timeline across her desk, each month marked with sticky notes detailing Miguel's deceptions. We need to be methodical about this, Mrs. Cruz. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every lie needs to be documented with dates and evidence. I pulled out my new notebook, the one Elena had suggested I buy specifically for this case. My handwriting was shakier than it used to be, but my memory was sharp. Years of keeping household budgets had trained me to remember financial details. November 15th, I read from my notes. Miguel insisted on coming to the bank with me. Told the teller he was helping me organize my finances. That was the first time someone got my PIN number. How do you know he got your PIN? Because I watched him watch me enter it. And the next week, the first unauthorized withdrawal happened. Sarah made notes on her legal pad. What about the credit cards? When did he have access to your personal information? I thought back, trying to piece together the puzzle. January. He said he was helping me organize my important documents. Social Security card, birth certificate, insurance papers. He took photographs of everything for safekeeping. And when were the credit cards opened? February through April. The pattern was becoming clear, even to me. Miguel had planned this systematically, step by step. Mrs. Cruz, I need you to do something that might be difficult. The next time Miguel calls or visits, I want you to record the conversation. My hand started shaking. He'll be angry if he finds out. He's already angry, Sarah said gently. And his anger isn't your responsibility. But his crimes are going to be his problem. That evening, Miguel called. I'd been expecting it. Maria had probably told him about my latest, stubborn behavior of refusing to drop the legal case. With my phone's recording function turned on, I listened to my son's voice change from false concern to barely contained rage. Mom, this lawyer is filling your head with lies. You're embarrassing the family. Miguel, I just want to understand why money has been disappearing from my account. You're confused about money. You always have been. Remember when Dad was alive and you couldn't balance the checkbook? That was a lie. I'd always managed the household finances while his father worked. But I didn't correct him. I let him talk, let him reveal himself. The credit cards were for emergencies, Mom. In case you needed something and forgot to tell us. $8,000 in emergencies. You don't understand how expensive things are now. Medical bills, home repairs, all the things you might need. What medical bills, Miguel? What home repairs? His voice got sharper. You're being difficult, Mom. This is exactly why you need someone responsible handling your affairs. Someone responsible. Or someone who wants my house. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. You know what, Mom? Fine. Keep fighting this. Keep trusting strangers over family. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen listening to the recording. My son's voice, captured forever, revealing exactly who he'd become. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence, it was living with the knowledge each piece of evidence brought. Bank records showed Miguel had been stealing from me for 6 months before he brought those papers to sign. Credit reports revealed he'd used my information to open not 3, but 5 different accounts. Each discovery was like a small death, killing a little more of the son I thought I knew. But something else was growing to replace that loss, strength I didn't know I possessed. Elena taught me how to organize evidence in binders with tabs and page protectors. Make it look professional, she said. Make it impossible to dismiss. Carlos showed me how to check my credit report online and how to place fraud alerts. Knowledge is power, he said. The more you know about your own finances, the harder it is for anyone to manipulate you. Margaret helped me practice telling my story without crying, without apologizing for Miguel's behavior. You didn't cause this, she reminded me. You don't have to be ashamed of being a victim. But you should be proud of being a survivor. By the end of the month, I had 3 thick binders of evidence, dozens of recorded conversations, and a stack of witness statements from bank employees who remembered Miguel's suspicious behavior. I also had something I'd lost months ago, confidence in my own judgment. When I looked in the mirror now, I didn't see a confused old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. I saw someone who'd been systematically deceived by a person she trusted, but who'd been smart enough to recognize the deception and brave enough to fight back. You've done excellent work, Sarah told me as we reviewed everything. This case is solid. Does that mean we'll win? Sarah smiled. Mrs. Cruz, you've already won the most important battle. You believed in yourself enough to fight. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature with the kind of professional politeness that made my stomach drop. The envelope was thick, official, with a law firm's name embossed in gold letters I didn't recognize. Inside, the words swam before my eyes: petition for guardianship, incompetent to manage her affairs, requires protection from exploitation. Miguel was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. My legs gave out, and I had to sit down hard on my kitchen chair. The same chair where he'd dismissed me all those weeks ago, where this nightmare had started. Now he was asking a court to make it official, to declare that I couldn't take care of myself. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger when I called her. This is a common escalation tactic, Mrs. Cruz. When abusers realize they're about to be exposed, they often try to discredit their victims first. But what if they believe him? What if a judge thinks I really am incompetent? Then we fight. We fight with every piece of evidence we've gathered, every witness we have, every recorded conversation that shows you thinking clearly and making rational decisions. But fighting meant evaluations. Lots of them. The neuropsychologist was a kind woman about my daughter's age who put me through hours of tests. Memory games, puzzles, questions about current events. I sat in her sterile office, my hands trembling from stress, trying to prove that my mind was still my own. Mrs. Cruz, try to relax, she said gently. Anxiety can affect test performance. Relax? My son was trying to have me declared incompetent so he could steal everything I owned, and she wanted me to relax. The medical evaluation was worse. Dr. Patel asked me to walk a straight line, touch my finger to my nose, remember lists of words. Simple tasks that felt impossible under the weight of what they meant. Are you taking any medications for anxiety or depression? He asked. Just what my doctor prescribed after the panic attack started. He made a note. I wondered if taking medication for stress would be used against me, as proof that I was unstable. The psychiatrist was the hardest. Dr. Williams asked me to tell him about my relationship with my family, my living situation, my financial management. Every answer felt like it could be twisted, used as evidence that I needed a guardian. Mrs. Cruz, some people might say that accusing your son of financial abuse suggests paranoid thinking. Some people might say that stealing from your elderly mother suggests criminal thinking, I replied. He smiled slightly and made another note. Between evaluations, the family pressure intensified. Roberto called almost daily, his voice heavy with disappointment. Mom, you're putting us all through hell. Miguel hired a lawyer now, and this is getting expensive for everyone. I didn't start this, Roberto. You could end it, though. You could drop the charges, work things out privately. Maria was more direct. Mom, do you know what will happen if you lose this competency hearing? Miguel will be your legal guardian. He'll control everything anyway. At least if you cooperate now, you might have some say in the decisions. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed worn down by the stress. Rosa, are you sure this is worth it? You look terrible. You're not sleeping, barely eating. Maybe there's a compromise. Compromise. Everyone wanted me to compromise with the person who'd been robbing me. The worst part was the doubt that crept in during the long, sleepless nights. What if I was wrong? What if my memory was failing and I just couldn't see it? What if the tests showed what Miguel claimed, that I was an incompetent old woman who needed protection from her own bad judgment? I started keeping a daily journal of everything I did, as proof to myself that my mind was working fine. Tuesday, balanced checkbook, called insurance company about coverage question, made grocery list, prepared dinner, read 3 chapters of library book, did crossword puzzle. Small things, ordinary things, but they were evidence of a functioning mind. Elena found me crying at the support group meeting. Rosa, what's wrong? What if he wins? What if the court decides I really am incompetent? Elena sat beside me, her voice firm. Rosa, incompetent people don't recognize financial fraud. Incompetent people don't gather evidence, hire lawyers, and fight back. You've done everything right. Then why does it feel like I'm losing? Because that's what they want you to feel. That's how gaslighting works, it makes you doubt everything, even your victories. She was right. Miguel's petition for guardianship wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was psychological warfare, designed to make me surrender even when I was winning. But lying in bed that night, listening to the familiar sounds of my house settling around me, I made a decision. Even if I lost, even if a court declared me incompetent, I wouldn't stop fighting. Because the alternative, living under Miguel's control, pretending his theft was care, accepting his lies as truth, wasn't really living at all. It was just existing in a prison built by someone who was supposed to love me. The courtroom smelled like dust and polished wood, the kind of scent that reminded me of old books and the waiting rooms of government buildings. I sat on the left side, beside Sarah, gripping the leather strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles ached. My binders, 3 of them, carefully tabbed and labeled, sat stacked neatly on the table before us, like quiet soldiers lined up for duty. Across the room, Miguel was adjusting the cuffs of his dress shirt, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at me. Not once. I had not seen him in person since he filed the guardianship petition. It was one thing to speak on the phone, to hear the venom wrapped in pleasantries. But it was another thing entirely to see him sitting in a courtroom, dressed like the professional son everyone trusted, claiming that I, his mother, was no longer capable of taking care of myself. The judge was a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that flicked from person to person with measured efficiency. When she spoke, her voice was low but firm, and somehow it made my chest settle. She wasn't unkind, but she also wasn't someone you could lie to easily. That gave me strength. Miguel's attorney spoke first. He used words like concern, cognitive decline, and protective intentions. He called Miguel a dutiful son and painted me as confused, anxious, and paranoid. We have family members prepared to testify that Mrs. Cruz has exhibited erratic behavior, forgetfulness, and emotional instability, he said, as if listing symptoms on a medical chart. Our goal is not to strip her of her dignity, but to ensure her safety and preserve her assets. I could feel the heat rising in my face. Strip me of my dignity. That's exactly what they were doing, dressing it up in legal language and false concern. I thought of Elena's words, peace built on lies isn't peace. It's surrender. I would not surrender. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood up calmly, respectfully, and began by submitting our documentation into evidence. I watched the court clerk take the binders with both hands, as if even he could sense the weight they carried, not just in paper, but in pain. Sarah spoke clearly and without theatrics. Your Honor, this case is not about an elderly woman in cognitive decline. It is about deliberate and sustained financial exploitation by a trusted family member. We have documented ATM withdrawals, forged signatures, unauthorized credit accounts, and multiple recorded conversations in which the respondent, Mr. Cruz, admits to actions consistent with financial abuse. I swallowed hard as Sarah continued, methodically laying out the timeline. November, Miguel sees my PIN. January, he photographs my documents. February to April, 5 credit cards opened. June, attempt to transfer deed. Each fact was accompanied by a corresponding piece of evidence, each tabbed section of my binder helping form a picture of deception that could no longer be denied. Then came my testimony. I stood slowly, knees stiff, heart pounding. Sarah had prepared me, but nothing could have truly readied me for the moment when I had to take the oath and sit in the witness box with my son watching. Mrs. Cruz, the judge said gently, can you tell us in your own words what has brought you here today? I took a breath. My son asked me to sign some papers. He told me they were just legal documents, nothing I needed to worry about. But I read them. And I realized that I was signing over my house and my savings. My voice trembled but did not break. He told me, you don't read anyway. But I do. I always have. And when I read those papers, I knew I needed help. Sarah nodded slightly from her seat. I went on, describing the months of slow erosion, Miguel inserting himself into my appointments, handling my bank visits, insisting I was confused when I questioned anything. I told them about the panic attacks, the support group, the evidence I had gathered with the help of others who had walked this same path. Do you believe you are mentally competent, Mrs. Cruz? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. I pay my own bills. I cook my own meals. I manage my life. What I don't do is let people take from me in the name of love. I paused, the silence thick. I didn't raise my children to treat me this way. But one of them did. Miguel's lawyer tried to discredit me. He asked if I was on medication. I answered truthfully. He asked about the panic attacks. I described them, but also explained why they began. Panic is a normal response to betrayal, I said. It doesn't mean I'm not thinking clearly. It means I was trying to survive something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. Sarah replayed a short clip from one of my recorded conversations with Miguel. His voice filled the courtroom, smooth, dismissive, then angry. When he said, maybe you shouldn't expect to see the grandkids anymore, I saw the judge's expression tighten. That one sentence, so casual, so cruel, said more than any binder ever could. When the judge announced she would render her decision within the week, I felt a strange numbness. We had done everything we could. Now, it was out of my hands. Back in Sarah's office that afternoon, I sat across from her holding a cup of chamomile tea she'd brought from home. You were extraordinary today, she said. Truly. I was terrified, I admitted. That's how we know it mattered, she replied. That night, I lit a candle at my kitchen table and stared at the flame. It flickered, delicate but steady, like something refusing to be blown out. I thought of all the women like me, women told they didn't understand, didn't matter, didn't read. Women who were dismissed, erased, rewritten out of their own lives. Not anymore. I hadn't lost my mind. I had finally reclaimed it. The letter arrived 5 days later. It was thinner than the others, just a single envelope, but the weight of what it carried made my hands tremble as I opened it. Sarah had warned me the decision would come by mail unless the court called us back. Even so, seeing the envelope with the county court seal made my stomach twist. I sat at the same kitchen table where all of this had started, where Miguel had dropped those papers beside my café con leche like I was just a nuisance to be managed. I ran my finger under the flap, slow and careful, as if rushing would change what was inside. The paper was crisp and official. I read the first paragraph twice before I understood what it meant. The court had ruled in my favor. The guardianship petition was denied. The judge had found no evidence of cognitive decline, incompetence, or inability to manage personal affairs. In her findings, she cited the extensive documentation, the timeline of financial exploitation, and Miguel's own recorded statements as proof of intent to deceive. The final lines hit me hardest. The court finds that the petitioner's actions appear to be financially motivated and not in the best interest of the respondent. The court recommends further review for potential civil penalties and restitution of misappropriated funds. My breath left me in one long, shaking exhale. I sat back, stunned, not with disbelief, but with the raw ache of long-delayed justice. I wasn't just not incompetent. I was believed. Sarah cried when I called her. "You did this, Rosa," she said. "You stood up and told the truth, even when it hurt. I'm proud of you." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Miguel's access to my bank accounts was officially revoked. The fraudulent credit cards were closed, and the financial institutions began investigating the charges. I gave testimony to a county elder protection investigator, sharing every detail again, this time knowing it wasn't just for me, it was for others too. People like Carlos and Margaret, whose stories were never heard in court. But justice, I soon learned, does not come without cost. Miguel didn't call. He didn't email or text or show up at my door to apologize. Instead, he vanished. I found out from Maria that he had taken Emma and Diego on a last-minute trip out of state, something about getting away from the stress. I wasn't invited to say goodbye. My grandchildren, who used to draw me pictures and bake cookies with me in this very kitchen, were simply gone. Maria stopped calling after I told her the court's decision. "I still don't understand why you had to make it so public," she said. "Couldn't we have handled this as a family?" I didn't have the energy to explain to her again that I tried. That it was Miguel who turned private betrayal into public war. That I begged them all to listen, and none of them did. She didn't want the truth, she wanted comfort, and I had none left to give. Roberto left a voicemail saying he was relieved it worked out, but thought I should consider family counseling. As if what I needed was to sit in a room and be told again that I misunderstood, that I exaggerated, that I should just move on. Only Carmen, my daughter-in-law, sent a short message that said, "I believe you now. I'm sorry I didn't sooner." It wasn't much. But it was more than I expected. Mrs. Patterson brought over a lemon pie and a bouquet of wildflowers. "You look taller," she said, handing them to me with a wink. Not in inches, but in spirit. That night, I allowed myself to cry, not the scared, trembling tears of someone drowning, but the quiet release of someone finally standing on shore. I thought about the house around me, its creaking floors, the chip in the bathroom tile, the faded photo of my husband on the hallway wall. For weeks, it had felt like a battlefield. Now, it felt like mine again. Still, the silence left in Miguel's absence was not easy. I missed Emma's laugh. I missed Diego's tiny hand in mine. I missed birthdays and movie nights and the way Miguel used to call me Mama when he wanted something. Those things didn't disappear just because a judge saw the truth. Loss doesn't ask if you were right or wrong, it just arrives and stays. Sarah offered to help me file for financial restitution, but I told her I needed time. I wasn't ready to go through another courtroom, not yet. What I needed was air. Space. A way to remember who I was before all of this. So I went for walks. I called Elena and told her the news, and she cried with me. Now you help someone else, she said. That's how we stay standing, by holding the next one up. I returned to the community center on Wednesday. Carlos gave me a hug that cracked something inside me open again. Margaret handed me a binder, identical to mine, and said, "Start another one, for someone else who's still in it." That weekend, I sat in my living room sorting through a box of old photographs. Pictures of birthdays and graduations, vacations and quiet dinners. Miguel's face was in many of them. He was laughing, young, innocent. I studied them, trying to remember when that version of my son disappeared. Trying not to hate the man he became. Forgiveness would not come quickly. But I would try. Not for his sake, for mine. Because holding on to anger would not bring Emma back to my kitchen. It would not bring back my old bones or my sleep or the ease with which I used to trust. But what I had now was something I hadn't had in a long time, control over my life. Over my story. The next day, I bought a new notebook. Not to record threats or transactions or legal timelines, but to write. About who I was. Who I had been. Who I was still becoming. The damage was real. The consequences would linger. But so would the truth. And that was something no one, no son, no judge, no whispering family member, could take from me again. The first morning I woke up without the weight of Miguel's guardianship petition pressing on my chest, the air in my house felt different. Lighter. Not empty, no, grief still lived here, but clear, like the moment after a heavy storm when the sky hasn't decided whether to shine or cry. I opened my curtains and let the sunlight flood in, even though I hadn't done that in weeks. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and lemon balm, the way it used to when I baked with the grandchildren. I hadn't lit the stove in a while, but I boiled water for tea and sat at the table just to listen to the sound of something other than my own worries. I'd begun writing again, not just the legal journal, but something softer. Letters I'd never send. Reflections. Recipes I remembered by heart but wrote down anyway, just so the act of remembering would become its own kind of restoration. The physical act of putting pen to paper helped me feel real again. Like I could prove my existence to myself. No banks. No lawyers. No one to doubt me. Just me, and the truth I carried. When Sarah called to check in, I told her I didn't want to press civil charges. At least not yet. I know we could win, I said. But right now, I just want to be left in peace. She understood. The door is always open, Rosa. You've already done the hard part. Whatever else you decide, I'm behind you. Her voice had a kind of quiet respect I wasn't used to hearing, especially from someone so young. But Sarah had seen me, really seen me, and once you've been seen like that, it changes how you carry yourself in the world. Elena asked if I would help facilitate the next support group meeting. At first, I hesitated. What did I have to offer, besides my own bruised heart and a binder full of pain? But she was patient, and when the day came, I sat in the chair beside her and listened as new voices filled the circle. An older man named Victor spoke of his daughter forging his signature on loan documents. A woman named Lita whispered through tears about her niece who used guilt and religion to take over her finances. I nodded. I knew these stories. And when they looked at me and asked how I got through it, I didn't give them perfect advice or slogans. I just said, I stopped thinking it was my fault. That seemed to land harder than anything else. Slowly, I began to leave the house more often, not out of obligation, but choice. I started going to the library again, where the woman at the front desk greeted me like an old friend. "We missed you," she said, handing me a stack of new arrivals. The word surprised me. I'd gotten so used to being forgotten that being missed felt like a gift. I checked out a few novels, some cookbooks, and a collection of poetry. At home, I read aloud to myself in the afternoons. My voice, shaky at first, grew stronger with each stanza. No one was listening, but that wasn't the point. I was reclaiming something, my rhythm, my dignity, my inner quiet. One afternoon, I passed by the community legal clinic where Sarah worked and saw a new poster in the window, Elder Rights Advocacy, Volunteers Needed. I stepped inside. The receptionist, a young man with nervous energy and a sweet smile, remembered me. "Mrs. Cruz. Sarah said you might stop by." "I don't have legal experience," I told him, "but I do have lived experience. And I have time. More time than I used to know what to do with." He handed me a volunteer packet and asked if I'd like to help with outreach, maybe speak at workshops or accompany others to appointments. I agreed. Not because I wanted to relive my trauma, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before: my pain had a purpose if it meant someone else didn't have to walk alone. Over the next few weeks, I began making small changes around the house. I took down the photos that made me ache more than they comforted. Not to erase the past, but to make room for something new. I rearranged the living room furniture to make space for my sewing table again. Mrs. Patterson helped me sort through my fabric box, and we spent one rainy afternoon laughing over old patterns and mending forgotten clothes. "You should teach a class," she said. "You could call it Thread and Therapy." The idea made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. The more I opened myself to the world again, the more it gave back. The neighbor's daughter began visiting me after school to help with little chores and keep me company. She reminded me of Emma, not in looks, but in spirit. Curious, bright-eyed, unfiltered. One day she asked, "Why do you live alone?" I paused, unsure how to answer. Then I said, "Because it teaches me how to be with myself. And that's important." I still missed Emma and Diego every day. I still hoped, quietly, that one day they'd knock on my door and ask why we hadn't baked cookies in so long. I kept a tin of sprinkles in the cupboard, just in case. But I didn't chase after what wasn't mine to control anymore. Some reunions come only with time. Others never come. I was learning to accept both. The hardest part of healing was forgiving myself, for not seeing it sooner, for not speaking up faster, for still loving a son who tried to destroy me. Some nights I lit a candle for him anyway. Not as absolution, but as release. I couldn't carry both justice and bitterness. One had to go. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat at the community center folding pamphlets for an upcoming elder advocacy event when a woman tapped my shoulder. "Excuse me," she said, "are you Rosa Cruz?" I nodded. "I've heard about you," she said softly. "My sister is going through something similar. She's scared. She thinks no one will believe her. Do you think you could talk to her?" I looked at her, this stranger, trembling with hope, and felt something shift. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was someone others came to when they were ready to begin. 6 months later, I stood at the entrance of the children's reading corner in the community library, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web in my lap and a dozen little faces staring up at me, waiting. The late afternoon sun streamed in through the windows, casting golden beams across the colorful carpet. It smelled like paper and old wood and possibility. I adjusted my glasses, smiled at the wiggling group in front of me, and began to read aloud. My voice was steady, deliberate, each word met with rapt attention. Some children mouthed the sentences with me, as if the rhythm of the story had etched itself into their bones. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be here, surrounded by children, volunteering at the library, feeling useful, alive, I wouldn't have believed them. Not when I was sitting in my kitchen clutching fraudulent credit card bills, unable to breathe. Not when my son was trying to have me declared incompetent. Not when I thought love meant silence, and silence meant survival. But things change. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, they change. After the court case ended, and the house was truly mine again in both paper and spirit, I began building a life not rooted in fear, but in intention. I continued volunteering at the legal clinic twice a week, sometimes translating for Spanish-speaking elders, sometimes just sitting beside someone who was too ashamed to say the words aloud, "My family is hurting me." And each time, I told them what I had learned the hard way, that dignity doesn't come from being loved without condition. It comes from knowing when to choose yourself, even when it breaks your heart. At the community center, I started a small weekly class, just a few older women and one persistent teenager, where I taught basic sewing. We called it Threaded Stories. The women stitched table runners and pillowcases, but more importantly, they stitched together memories. We talked about the things we weren't supposed to say out loud, betrayals, regrets, moments of strength that came too late or just in time. Some of them cried at the sound of their own voices speaking truths they hadn't dared speak before. And always, we stitched. Mrs. Patterson, dear, steadfast Carmen, remained my anchor. We still drank tea on her porch, still traded recipes and errands, still laughed like teenagers after a glass of boxed wine. One evening, I told her I didn't know how I would have survived without her. She just patted my hand and said, "That's what we're for. Us old women, they think we fade, but we don't. We root." I began to believe that. One morning in early spring, I found a card tucked under my doormat. No envelope. Just a folded piece of stationery with shaky handwriting that said, "Grandma, I miss you. Love, Emma." No return address, no phone number. Just that. I held the card to my chest for a long time, letting the tears fall without apology. I didn't know if Miguel had allowed her to write it. I didn't care. She had found a way. That was enough. I framed the card and placed it above my writing desk. It sat next to a photo of me at the courthouse steps, binder in hand, eyes weary but proud. Not because I needed to remember the pain, but because I needed to remember the courage it took to name it. One afternoon, Elena invited me to speak at a local event on elder empowerment. I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength, but I agreed. On stage, I wore the navy dress I had worn to court and pinned my hair back the way I had that day, a silent nod to the woman I had been then. I looked out over the audience, gray heads, walkers, adult children nervously clutching notepads, and I told them the story of how someone once said to me, "You don't read anyway." The gasp that followed was audible. And then I told them how I'd built a new life, one binder, one support group, one conversation at a time. Afterward, a man approached me with tears in his eyes. "You just described my mother's life," he said. "I never understood why she stopped trusting us. Now I do." I didn't need applause. That man's words were enough. The truth, once spoken, does not go back into hiding. Now, every Wednesday afternoon, I read to the children at the library. Some of them come from difficult homes. Some just need a place to sit where someone sees them. I choose stories with brave characters, quiet resilience, hidden wisdom. Stories that show how small voices can carry big truths. After story time, I teach them how to sign their names. We practice letters on scratch paper, and when they get it right, I say, "Look at that. You do read. You always could." One little girl, eyes wide, asked me last week, "Are you a teacher?" I smiled. Something like that. When I walk home from the library, I pass the bank where Miguel used to meet me, where the teller once asked if someone was helping me. They don't ask that anymore. They greet me by name. They know better now. In my house, I've begun filling photo frames again. Not just of the past, but of the present, my sewing group, the support team at the legal clinic, the library children holding up their library cards like trophies. I don't erase the family I lost. I just stopped letting them define who I am. There's a quote I found written in the margin of an old book at the library. I copied it down and taped it to my fridge. It says, "She remembered who she was and the game changed." That's my story. That's Rosa Cruz. Not confused. Not unstable. Not weak. A woman who reads. A woman who fought. A woman who now walks others home when they've been lost too long in the dark. And every time someone tries to diminish me, whether with a sentence or a silence, I remember what I built after they tried to break me. Because resilience is not loud. It is steady. And mine will outlive their doubt.